Thank you everybody for showing up. Really excited to start. I'm like looking for like the people in the chat. I think we got a pretty good number of people here. This is exciting. Yeah, so welcome to Arweave week 6 of the fellowship. That is the last week. Holy cow, I cannot believe we are in the last week already. The last month and a half has just zoomed by. For those of us in the States, it's zoomed by for a number of reasons, but it's also zoomed by because it's just been a ton of work. I've seen some incredible stuff from different projects. Really excited to get a chance to kind of put a capstone in and like actually get to watch kind of the results of what everybody's been building. So we are coordinating the pitch and demo days. So if you haven't heard from us, please reach out. We have a system. It's not perfect. You may have slipped through the cracks. Please do not let yourself slip through the cracks. So if you are waiting to hear from us and you haven't, raise your hand, reach out. We'll get to you. We'll get back to you. If you want help pitching, building, or just want to talk in general, reach out to Sam and myself. Discord's handles at rweave-sam and myself, just Zach 0254. And obviously, I'm assuming we can put the Discord invite link. You should definitely join the Discord if you have not already. That is where most of the work goes down. We talk to people. People kind of share the amazing stuff that they're building. This is really exciting. If you're new to Arweave in general, I would recommend starting a couple of starting places. Like one, obviously the docs themselves are a great place to begin. But another place to start is actually the opportunities board on community.xyz. A lot of the amazing projects that you have seen present over the last week or two. There we go. Thank you so much, India. And so a lot of the amazing projects that you have seen present over the last 5 to 6 weeks during the Hack and Tells, many of them are running on profit sharing communities. Many of them have opportunities in which you can contribute. You can start learning how to build on Arweave, and you can actually start beginning to earn like profit sharing tokens within these projects. So if you see a project that you're really excited about, check out the opportunity board and get involved. This talk today is about In Search of the Mythical DApp User. And it is an extremely 0-to-1 approach in finding strangers and converting them to users. I say 0-to-1 strategically. If you have read Peter Thiel's 0-to-1, like it's all kind of in powers of 10. So it's 0-to-1, 1-to-10, 10-to-100, etc. I think these are actually pretty good buckets to think about. User acquisition. Why do I say mythical? Is it just because I like unicorns and feel like Uniswap shouldn't have the market cornered on this type of imagery? No, not necessarily. We talk about the mythical DApp user because honestly, there just aren't that many of them. Much like unicorns, there aren't that many of them. Things have actually improved a lot over the last 18 months. I'm just going to cite on DApp Market Report 2020, they said that user activity has increased 97%, all-time high of 1.2 million users. That's an all-time high. That's really good for crypto. That is actually not that much. It's a drop in the bucket of Web 2, though. So there just aren't that many users. Even on the top 5 that we're seeing, top 4 that we're seeing now, if you look at it, like you have almost 500K in monthly active users. I believe the time horizon I had set for the Screech cap was 30 days. If you just go down 4 spots, you are suddenly at less than 10% activity for the number 4 spot. So incredible power laws in effect here, and especially like if you kind of continue to go down the screen. Down the list, like you see even further that these individual apps have very few monthly active users. So all of that to say, competition for users in this space is actually pretty high. That's something to keep in mind with that, and I think that is why it's really important to kind of think through these sort of strategies when talking about engaging not family, not friends, not people that you're necessarily friendly with, but complete strangers, because eventually you're going to run out of those kind of family circles that you can pitch to. First, a disclaimer. Here's my customary I am making this up as I go along. Not really. I've actually prepared a lot for this. I've actually done a lot for this, but I'm not necessarily an expert. I've worked with amazing people who are growth hackers, amazing marketers, amazing community people. So this is kind of how I see hierarchy of growth. This is how I see it break down, essentially, between a whole bunch of different people. Oh dear, did I mess this up? I think it's fine. Okay, sorry. I've worked with amazing people in each of these buckets. So I want to be really quick to kind of specify that I'm an expert and I'm learning. And then in marketing, I think it's still something that I'm spending a lot of time. I've kind of set aside 2021 to sort of figure out this whole passive user acquisition growth. But these are kind of like my sweet spots, user research and then community. And I've learned from amazing people. Peter Pan from Metacartel, he actually gave a talk here talking about growing distributed communities. Go back and revisit that. He is, in my opinion, one of the absolute best community makers in the space. Another one, Yalor from Raid Guild. Also amazing. Raid Guild and Gitcoin, actually. It was actually a huge get, in my opinion, for Gitcoin to get Yalor on their community, because I think he's one of the best that we've got in the space. And I have kind of like some rough estimations here about like how much time you can expect to spend building these out. Just kind of like a super high level, I want to set the stage and make sure that we know what we know going in. Some assumptions that I made whenever I wrote this is, one, you got a product and it works and it's ready for users. This is was our hope for the end of this 6 week fellowship, especially for those of you who just started out. You've got a product, it works, it's ready for users. My second hope, though, is a little bit different, or it's I think not as obvious, which is you've already onboarded your friends and your family and everyone who owes you a favor, right? Like we've kind of hit that saturation point of your localized network. And why is that? It's because you spend a lot of time onboarding them. You've learned the rough patches of your product and smooth them out. So you're getting rid of, essentially, the purpose of onboarding family, friends, and people that owe you favors is that you're smoothing out the rough edges of your app that for strangers, they just don't have the patience for. They don't necessarily know you. They're thinking about your application and your experience in purely pragmatic terms of, does it solve my problem? Yes, no. And so you want to essentially use your family and friends and like kind of like your peer circle as the place in which you're learning, you're getting those like early those first sets of insights that you can like start smoothing out the experience. What are we covering? We're covering how to meet people you previously didn't know. This sounds super basic, but guess what? For introverts like myself, this actually requires a lot of work. How to talk to them about what you're building, how to pitch them on giving your product a chance, and then how to make the most of the chances strangers take on your product. So again, going back to this, it's a hierarchy of growth, right? Whenever you first start out, you're looking for those first 10 users. The first 10 users are what essentially like give you kind of that solid base to understand what you're building, why you're building it, and like what they need to see in order to continue to use your product. The rough estimates I have are 5 to 30 hours, and you can expect like 1 to 10 new users from it. This doesn't sound like a lot, but guess what? Whenever you're going from 0 to 1, that is that's an incredible leap. And like 1 to 10 is also massive. And it's especially in how you construct this sort of process that lends itself to the types of insights that you need to build a product that's sustainable. So if you heard my previous talk, and I'm sure we can link to it or something, but might look familiar. This is essentially how I think about product design. Step 1, you understand the problem space. Step 2, you define the problem that you're actually trying to solve. Step 3 is ideating. That's the fun part. That's what we all really enjoy. That's like thinking about how to solve the problem creatively. Prototyping, which is like building something that is not necessarily an MVP. It can't necessarily go out to the masses, but it's to test those hypotheses that you've developed and define and ideate. And then you evaluate the success. Man, India, you're so fast. That's crazy. So evaluate is number 5. Now, how do you evaluate? You evaluate with people who aren't necessarily family and friends, right? Like you want to find people in the problem space that you want to work in and have them interact with the prototype that you've created, and then determine whether or not it's valuable, it's worth building. Again, from the previous talk, this is my certainty over time chart. You want to continuously iterate based off of that to get to the point of a reasonable point of certainty to where it's a good bet. And then why do we do that? Because I think as the last 3 to 5 years of crypto have taught us anything, and if not the last 3 to 5 years of crypto, then the last 10 to 15 years of building web products, is that if you build it, maybe some people might come, but also will it be enough to justify the giant stadium? Like, how do we know the size of the stadium that we're building if we don't first know how interested people are, how often they're going to go there, the size of the crowds, etc.? I don't know. Maybe let's spend a week or two making sure that this will be worth it for me personally. If you're building on your nights and weekends, you've only got so many nights and weekends before you can, like, it's a very, it's a precious resource. Honestly, time is a much more precious resource than money. Because you can always get money back. You can't get your time back. And so in my opinion, it is worthwhile kind of figuring this out. Now, all of that to say, that's kind of like a 5-minute summary of why I would talk about user research a whole lot in the act of product design. But something that I've done that I don't know a ton of people who have done it up until this next person is, I think that you can also use this product research side as a way to start building that user acquisition funnel. So the first 0 to 10 people that might start using the product are actually the first 10 people that you start talking to the product to determine whether or not it's even worthwhile building in the first place. I hadn't heard of anybody else who had done this until I read the Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick, which was really exciting for me. So I read a lot of books about user research, and I have a link to a lot of them in the appendix. I have read a lot of books on marketing and customer development. I haven't read a ton that combined the two until I read the Mom Test, which is why I got so excited about this. If you want a much more thorough, sort of like out of the box solution for these types of systems, I would recommend picking it up. This is probably a good crash course with maybe like some like custom sort of solutions that I do. This is really good. I would strongly recommend it. But first, a disclaimer, because we are in crypto, right? Like I've couched a lot of this in like, yeah, crypto, it has users, but not that many, etc. This sort of like slow and steady, like iteration around it is pretty foreign, pretty counterintuitive, especially in crypto. Like, so if you're a builder, you just want to build, and I totally get that. I'm a builder. I just want to build. I kind of get wrapped up in kind of like the act of creation as being something really, really fulfilling. But especially in crypto, because we see so many instances of, there we go. Because we see so many instances of people just kind of YOLOing smart contracts into the ether and then suddenly seeing success, right? If you can do that, this talk probably isn't for you. I mean, you have things to teach me. So please reach out and let's teach me how you YOLO a smart contract and get $1 billion locked up over a weekend. Even though I'm not quite sure that's the game I want to run, I think it's really interesting. I also think it's important to note that, like, with some of these folks, they still have to go through the method of user acquisition. It's just played out over multiple projects as opposed to a single project, right? Like Andre, he built up a reputation of being a really interesting builder who has a really interesting perspective about DeFi in the space. And that's why people, that is why he can put together a protocol, a dApp or something, throw it out into the wild, and then people suddenly start using it. It's because he's built up a reputation. He's kind of gone through these first steps, and he's been able to retain it via a community, which is actually the last part of that. So takeaway number one that I want you to have from this is to know where your users are. In the before times, before everybody was locked down and we weren't dealing with a global pandemic, I would really strongly encourage people, if you were building for a group of users that weren't yourself, and even if you were, I would strongly encourage you to get out of your office or your house or wherever you were and go to where they are. Because we are all under lockdown, this actually makes it easier as well as more difficult, right? Because so much of it has kind of moved into the digital space. I generally break these networks down into open networks like Reddit and Twitter, and then closed networks like Telegram and Discord. both of which are really, really powerful. In fact, to reference the slide before this, Andres, like part of the power of these sorts of builders who can kind of like, they have a following, they can put something together, they can throw it out into the ether and immediately get adoption, is because they are in some of these like really strong closed networks like Telegram that they can kind of share it out, and because they have large following bases like Twitter. So there is something to said about building an audience with what you're working on. If you say, I can't find people where I can't find the people that congregate around like the thing that I want to build, I can't find them, that's a signal for your overall market size. That should be telling you how big to build the stadium, how much time to spend on it, or total addressable market is how we talk about it within VC. So that's something that alone is a signal. So if you can't find a subreddit with 10,000 people talking about the thing that you want to build, and you can't find a decent amount of people on Twitter talking about it, take that into consideration whenever you're building the project and thinking about like how am I going to sustain this? The one that I would say, obviously, like, go to these networks, interact with them. Don't just like try to poach. Like, people can kind of smell like the salesperson a mile away, right? So if you just go to a network to like try to pull people over into your thing, people are going to know that pretty easily. I would say go there open and wanting to contribute to the conversation and wanting to learn from the conversation. That said, also, you can't be everywhere. So like pick the network that kind of suits your style of communication, your strengths. My style of communication is Twitter. I really like Twitter. I enjoy kind of the people that I meet there and the conversations that I see. I enjoy the microblogging format. So it is kind of a unique platform that I enjoy. This technique for meeting rantos is specific to Twitter, but you can actually like apply it to a whole bunch of other platforms as well. It's basically called Twitter fishing. TweetDeck is amazing. If you, it's a free product that Twitter bought and now offers. You can essentially set up a ton of different columns, all around like very specific action or key phrases. You can sort, you can only choose a certain amount of engagements, et cetera. Is a really, really powerful tool. Whenever I'm working on a product and I want to start building out a customer funnel and I want to like start really understanding the problem space, I create a whole bunch of new columns where I can follow conversations that are happening. And I just kind of, this is like my 10,000 foot view about like how people are thinking about sort of the problem space that I'm thinking through. It is so granular. So like the example that I like to use is like an NFT. So like, let's say that I'm working on like an NFT sort of project, right? And I set a column for, NFTs, terrible experience, right? Like, because I want to understand people who are having problems with current solutions and if I can build something better. This to me is actually a pretty good example of like the type of conversation that you're looking for on Twitter. And this is a real tweet. I like literally spent like 20 seconds just like kind of like looking on Twitter to see if I could find something that might be worthwhile. And yeah, here we go. Does anyone know about any other active and reputable websites that offer NFT art drops other than Nifty Gateway? I had such a terrible experience, and after today, I can't see myself using it again. What a letdown. This person is primed for that. How do you approach rando strangers? You could do it with like a kind of a simple link drop. You just kind of randomly message them and say like, hey, we're working to make it better. You should check out Nifty's at nifty's.com. This is not a real URL. It's, or rather, I don't own this URL. This isn't a project. This is just something that I mocked up, but this could be essentially one way that you approach the conversation. This might actually be like how you think about it. Like, this is kind of like my first inclination is to just like kind of like spam people as we jump in. But this is actually bad. Don't do this. Resist your initial inclination to do this, because you actually don't learn anything, right? You're not creating those feedback loops to understand what the value prop is and why people would be interested in using your project. And honestly, like, if it's not as this is actually a really unique tweet, because like he's actually asking for He's actually asking for like recommendations, especially if they're not asking for recommendations. Don't do this. It's better to engage them. So that's actually leads to takeaway number 2. You need to ask for advice, not for a sale. And this is kind of the whole thing, right? You're double dipping with user interviews and business development. People are resistant whenever you immediately start pitching them, right? Like the guards are up. They know that you're trying to separate them from their money, all because you have this thing and you seem more intent on making the sale than you do like actually understanding their problems and fixing their things. So remember this thing I said, don't do this. An alternative and a better way to begin asking for advice and begin building that customer base. And obviously this is too long for Twitter, but this can be like that kind of conversationally. You can just say, super bummed to hear that. I'm actually working on some ideas around NFTs and how to make them better. Would you be up for a quick call? Would love to hear more about your terrible experience and how we could make it better. So a potential there. Basically try to get them on the phone, try to, or the Zoom meeting or whatever, and try to just start learning from them. Okay. This is, again, it used to be a lot harder. You used to like have to actually like drive to where they were. It would be like an hour out of your time, etc. Now that COVID's happened, everyone is a lot more comfortable with Zoom meetings, which is kind of an incredible. You can have them back to back. It's a lot less time on your end to do this. And then, yeah, get ready for the interview. I would strongly encourage you not to make this an overly academic exercise. Usually whenever people hear the idea of research, and specifically user research, you kind of groan a little bit. You're like, oh no, that just sounds like a ton of time that I'm spending not building. And it's actually, don't over intellectualize this. All you're doing when you're talking to people who have had experiences in what you're building is you're exploring the problem space from their perspective. And you're looking for opportunities, okay? Especially since they are the people who you're hoping to end up using the product, right? There's easily another 10 hours of further study on this. I have links if this interests you. It is something that I think reaps an incredible amount of rewards. Awards. It's a very rich area of study. Partially because, like, so if we go back to this, right? Like if I'm saying like, hey, we're working to make it better, you should check it out on nifties.com. Best case scenario, if I just kind of like drop a link, is he spends $5 on my platform and then never uses it again. And maybe I get his email address so I can like theoretically try to reactivate him as a user. But oftentimes I don't, especially in crypto, right? We've kind of got this pseudonymous super permeable network, which I think is really great, but also makes kind of customer retention really difficult. So he goes, best case scenario, he goes to Nifty's, he drops something. And it's, you know, he spends like the equivalent of like $5 on the platform. That's not going to change my life. That's not going to make the product sustainable. But if instead we sit down and we talk about what the experience is and I tell him about what I'm building and then he tells me either that sounds amazing, I need it tomorrow. Also, could you add XYZ, or that really doesn't fit my, my use case. I would be much more interested in this direction, XYZ. Those are the types of insights that are the difference between a fun project that you work 6 months on and then abandon because nobody's using it, and something that you can like work the next 5 years on or 10 years on and become something that actually sustains itself. So, so yeah, easily another 10 hours of study. If it's something that interests you, I would strongly recommend reading more about it. The interview structure, you're going to spend the majority of the time talking about what they're actually experiencing. You should not be spending the majority of the time talking about your thing. You should be spending the majority of the time talking about their thing. That's why you're asking for advice. You're asking them about the problem from their perspective, because ultimately you're building solutions for them, not for yourself. The last 30% of the time will be testing the value pitch itself. And when you're exploring the problem space, like it's some pretty simple bullets, right? The 5 whys. This is really helpful to get to the root of the problem, right? So whenever you say like, why was the experience so terrible? And they say, oh, I just like, I was on a new computer and I installed MetaMask and it was just really frustrating to have to go through all of that. And then I didn't have any ETH to buy that. That's a pretty good insight. But then if you ask them like, oh, like, why are you at a new computer? Is it a new computer? Or then they could say something like, no, I'm on vacation. I'm visiting friends. I just went to some art galleries that kind of got me thinking about like NFT art, which I got really excited about. And I didn't bring my laptop because I'm an idiot. So I had to get this new, I had to use my friend's laptop. Continuously asking why gets us past like the sort of tactical solution. So like the first why gets us like, oh, maybe we should incorporate a fiat on-ramp like Wire. The second why though gets us to what inspires them to make the decision, the purchase decision in the first place. That gives you like strategic ideas around like, oh, maybe we should partner with local art galleries. Maybe it's an incredibly valuable if you just stay curious. And that gets to the second point. Be curious. Let them speak. Don't just focus on what you're building, focus on what they're doing. And then record and take notes is super tactical, but super good. If you're working with a team, I would strongly encourage you to, if possible, do a 2-person interview. One person leads, the other person takes notes, and then can like kind of subtly ask questions or maybe even communicate via chat to not break up the flow. If you're looking for, these are just kind of resources, again, that we're linking to. Go to our Discord. I'm going to drop that in the fellowship chat maybe 10 minutes after this if you want it. But this is just, we have like at my previous job at Consensus, we had a template essentially for people who were looking for examples on how to kind of structure these things. Definitely check that out. Something else to check out. Oh my gosh, cold calling for introverts. It's such a great video. Jay she's a UX content strategist at Facebook. Katie, who's leading the interview, used to work with her at Consensus. She's now at Google. So you're literally listening to two kind of like masters of the craft talk about how to talk to people, especially if you're not like someone who likes talking to people like I am. You'll even get to hear me ask some dumb questions at the end. But it's especially cool because Jay is like an expert at finding people to talk to and convincing them to talk to her. She is so good. Like she makes like Twitter phishing look like kind of like kindergarten stuff. She's really, really good, and it's really worth listening to her kind of talk through that. The second half of this, the value pitch, it's the last 20%. The way it's constructed, the way I tend to construct it is it's a 30-second elevator pitch. If you cannot articulate the value that you're trying to provide in 30 seconds, you need to rethink at least how you're conceiving of the product, or at least how you're kind of talking about the product, but maybe even the product itself. 30-second elevator pitch. Try to make it as simple and as grabbing and as much of a hook as possible. Then you need to have an ask towards your end goal. Now, again, we're going to reference my previous talk. You need to, when you're building something, you need to know what the outcomes of it are. You need to know why you're building it in the first place. Are you building something to be sustainable? To bootstrap, you're trying to build a business, you probably need to start thinking about revenue. If you're building like a company that you would like to get venture backed and you're thinking more about network effects and building large communities around it and like building something that's kind of like a fat protocol, hyper valuable sort of product that's going to, grow 100x over the next 2 months or 2 years or whatever, then you need to start thinking about that value ask as the community. And the reason it's important to incorporate an ask at the end is, for me at least, I think it's important to like actually gauge how interested they are. If you went up to a random stranger and you showed them like a mock-up of your app and you say like, is this interesting to you? They're going to say yes. And that tells you absolutely nothing. Is this interesting it's not necessarily, people don't make buying decisions based off of like whether or not they're curious. And a lot of times, unless the value prop is really low and they're really, really curious. But even then, like you have no way to gauge how interested they are. So a skin in the game signal, like a value ask at the end, a skin in the game signal actually like lets you start to gauge how compelling of a value prop you have, how compelling of a product you have. So if it's revenue, you basically say like, would you be interested in signing up for a beta? We're going to be launching in 2 weeks or 5 weeks, or maybe we're already launched. We'd love to give you a product tour. Or do you know other people who'd be interested in this? Would you be willing to give us intros? That is also a value ask, right? It's them essentially staking their reputation on an introduction. Community is the same thing. Sign up for future updates. If they say no, it's almost as good as if they say yes. Because if they say no, then you immediately follow up with, so first off, really appreciate your honesty. I know it's kind of awkward whenever you're talking to a stranger to be honest. So thank them for their honesty, because that is them being brave. Then you say something to the effect of like, out of curiosity, is there any way in which we could modify this product in a way that would make you more interested? Or is this something that's just not for you? And if so, why? I'm super curious to understand why it's not for you. And they'll tell you why it's not for them. And if you've done your job properly at the front half, where you actually get an idea of who they are and why they work on the thing and why they have that problem, you can do two things. You can either decide, this is a huge segment. If I built this product for this person, this has a huge potential to like be something that is sustainable or that could be used by hundreds of thousands of people. Or they tell you enough, they kind of let you realize that, oh, this is kind of a niche person. I probably don't want to build for them, because this is really, really unique to what their case is. They live on the West Coast, where there's a ton of boutique little art installation galleries, and I don't have access to that. So maybe their experience isn't relevant to the type of product I want to build. But when you get them to say no, and then you get them to explain why they said no, it helps clarify. It helps close doors, honestly. Like, your job as a product person early on is to close as many doors as possible while identifying the right doors to walk through for your product. Them saying no closes doors for you, which is great. Takeaway number 3, build relationships and then community. Value exchange is a two-way street. So why are you trying to get users? You need to build something valuable. Are you trying to build an audience or a community? Create value and share it for free. You will be rewarded with their attention, their time, and eventually their patronage. But you have to provide value. I think one of the most interesting trends that we're kind of seeing in the world today is sort of an exit of writers and journalists from traditional media institutions into Substack. This to me is fascinating. And it didn't happen overnight, right? I think the old adage, an overnight success, 10 years in the making, is absolutely true. And so whatever you're building, whatever space you're interested in working in, you probably need to start thinking about ways in which you can create small things and release it to the public for free, to begin, I think, like establishing yourself. It does 3 things really. It establishes you as an expert. It starts giving back to the community that you eventually want to support the things that you're building. These are like some options that you could do. Co-create with users. This to me is like one of the most powerful product design things that I just don't see a ton of people doing, which is literally like you step through the product with them and then you build it with them. So you are in Figma, you're screen sharing, and you're like letting them co-create this experience with you that gives you a ton of ideas on how to actually structure the product. Micro experiences. So like take small parts of the app that you want to build and with like the highest amount of value delivery, and just create it, put it out in the world, let people use it, let people give kind of like their ideas around it. Reports and courses are also an excellent way to begin building out that community around your product. Again, it's a value for value exchange. And what happens when you invest in others, like you start building a community. So this is a good article about community is the new moat. I linked to some other stuff. Scott Galloway, I think, is kind of a brilliant marketer. I strongly recommend like checking out. He had a video series called L2 Media before Gartner bought him out. That was great. I think still a lot of like really, really excellent. I think a lot of really excellent insights for basically marketing. He's kind of a marketing genius. Then he moved on. He has a podcast with Kara Swisher and then a whole bunch of other stuff. Really insightful guy. And he basically pointed out that Amazon and web buying in general has kind of eroded brand loyalty. Nobody's really loyal to brands anymore. If you think about how you buy or your purchasing flow, you'll go to Amazon likely or some other store, or you'll go to Google and just type in the product and you'll look at the top search results. You'll cross section that with reviews and then you'll make the purchase. You don't develop positive feelings for the brands that you're working with yet. And so how do you kind of like make yourself proof? I would say like, search layer resistant, right? Like how do you start building like a community that like has loyalty? And so you're not having to like continuously bring new people in. You start thinking about the people that are using your product as a community and you start investing in that community. So This kind of brings me to the last part of the talk. Be creative, iterate, and find your own strategy. I don't want this talk to be prescriptive. I think I have failed if you take this as a prescriptive talk where it's like, I just have to follow, steps 1, 2, and 3, and then I'll be able to do something. You can't, like, I have never heard of a product or a project that has just like followed the playbook and been successful. Every one of them has thought creatively about it. Here I have, like, you can't build something unique just by copy and pasting user acquisition strategies any more than you can build truly revolutionary technology by copy and pasting from Stack Overflow. Don't prove me wrong. Don't spend 2 months building something amazing just by copy and pasting Stack Overflow. That sounds like, I'm sure people have done it and can do it. But I think like the spirit of what I'm trying to communicate is that like we are creative builders. We like building because it's a creative exercise. And I would strongly encourage you to look at these sorts of activities, user research, customer acquisition, and building up kind of like a user funnel as not like things that I have to do in order to like continue to build, but as creative acts in and of themselves. Be creative. I really hope this is live soon. This went down in between Friday and Monday. He didn't renew his URL. This is an excellent site where he basically just covers a whole bunch of things that did not scale, that companies did, that were that essentially like got them their first customers. Nomad List, building my startup in the open, sharing regular updates, manually fulfilled more than 1,000 orders over close to 6 months. I've been bugging him on Twitter. You should bug him on Twitter too to maybe put this back up at @thisisKP_. It's kind of the guy who put this together. It's great. I don't know why it went down. Maybe he just kind of forgot to update his credit card information. I would be careful. There's a ton of resources like this though. So if this never goes back up, Paul Graham has an essay, Do Things That Don't Scale. If you just type Google Do Things That Don't Scale, if you just type in Do Things That Don't Scale, you'll see a ton of those things. The only thing I would say is be careful about that. There is like, I feel like a subset of like the entrepreneur, growth hacking sort of media content that just, not to put this indelicately, but it's like founder porn. It's like you can get wrapped up into like what other people are doing, and you get like so invested in those kind of stories that you don't actually do anything yourself. So be careful. Don't go too far down that rabbit hole, but definitely look at it for inspiration. Here is my list of further reading. So about user research and biz dev, Cold Calling for Introverts, The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. About marketing, Seth Godin is kind of the cliched answer, but that's because he's really, really good. This is marketing. It's not about marketing. It's about building products that people want. It is essentially a product design book, in my opinion, but from a marketing angle, it's fantastic. Scott Galloway is really great. I linked to a couple of his videos that I really, really liked. To Sell is Human by Daniel H. Pink was also really, really good. About community building, Peter Pan's talk that he gave at Arweaves was fantastic. Communities are the new moat. The other talk that I referenced, Case Study Indie Hackers. This to me is like one of the most interesting products that I have discovered over the last 5 to 10 years. 5 years. Let's put a cap on it. 5 years. They have a fascinating story, and I think it's a really compelling case study about someone who really understood a community so well that when they started building, it became really obvious what they needed to build. And I think he ended up selling like crazy soon. I think his exit was in like 24 months. Don't quote me on that. Maybe do some research, but really, really quick way. And I think Courtney just has a laser focus on users and really understands how to build things for people. The final book, Working in Public, that's a caveat. I haven't read that yet, but I've heard it's amazing. If it's not, I'll probably read that maybe over December. And if it's not great, but I'm expecting it to be amazing, if it's not great, I'll update it with like Seth Godin's We Need You to Lead Us. But this is like kind of the caveat. I've heard amazing things about it though. Thank you. That's it. That's all I got. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Obviously, if you have questions, I'm on Twitter and on Discord, so join Arweave's Discord. My DMs are open on Twitter, so you can reach out to me there too. Happy to talk about customer acquisition. Happy to talk about talking to people in general. Yeah, just please reach out if you got any questions. Happy to help.